but also on our TechSoup Connect London webpage.
Right. I think it's probably, we've got a fairly packed agenda, so we'll kick off now. And I'm Richard Collins. I'm one of the co-organisers of the TechSoup Connect London group. And this is the topic for today, which I think is an important topic. I've been working in the sector for a long time, and one of the main challenges I think continues to exist is organizations actually being able to track meaningful data from their CRMs and database systems. And we've got two really excellent speakers today to talk about this, and there's also an opportunity for you to sort of network and discuss these challenges with colleagues from other organizations. I've already asked, but just to repeat again for those just arriving, if you could rename yourself in the chat to say where you're from, and if you would like to connect with others, rename yourself on your Zoom title, and then introduce yourself in the chat if you'd like to network with others with a LinkedIn connection or an email address. So a little bit about the group, and then we'll get to the topic of the day. So we're TechSoup Connect London. We used to be called some time ago Red London, but we've changed our names for reasons too complicated to explain. But our objective is to provide a meetup space for those who are working in some way with digital, either in a charity or with charities. And it's a space to sort of share knowledge and experience. And we also want to try and, every session, provide a sort of networking opportunity where you can meet colleagues in breakout rooms and sort of share your experiences, share problems, share solutions that you found. You can see on the left-hand side there that we have a website and we have a Twitter presence, and we are also on LinkedIn. So follow us there if you haven't already. In terms of, go back. We're a voluntary run group, and there are 5 of us who at the moment who've been putting this session and other sessions together. So I'm Richard Collins. I'm a digital consultant. I've been working in the sector for 30 plus years. And then there's Kate, who's from Superhighways, Tracy, who is a data scientist working with the Legal Education Foundation, Sid, who is a senior civil servant, and then Eva, who is runs the data analysis team at Macmillan. And if anybody else is interested in joining us, please let us know. It's all, more hands to the pump, the better. So that's us as a group. In terms of the agenda, we're doing the welcome introduction now. Then we're going to put you into a breakout room, small group, just to meet other people who are here and to sort of share your problems, why you're here, what sort of challenges you are facing. And my colleague Tracy, I think, is going to talk you through what that involves in a moment. And then we've got, I think, 2 really excellent presentations from Claire from Meaningful Data and Harrison from Suru, and they will introduce themselves much better than I can introduce them, followed by further breakout networking sessions where you can sort of discuss what you've learned, share what you're planning to try as a result, and then we wrap up with a bit of information about our next meeting and asking for ideas for future sessions. If you've got any things that you would like to announce, there's a space for community shout outs, and then we wrap up. But there's a feedback form, and I think we might put the link to that in the chat now, so that if sometimes people have to leave early, that we're really keen to get your feedback, positive and negative. If you've got ideas for future sessions, or if you think we could be doing this better, please let us know, and we aim to finish by 1:30. So that's the plan. Do my colleagues want to add any more to that? Otherwise, it's it was Tracy, I think we said was going to take over. Yeah, Tracy, do you want to just talk us through the breakout session?
And I was muted. Darn it. So unmuted now. Yes, happy to take you through the session. As Richard said, we're keen to kind of ensure that you get a chance to kind of speak with colleagues and share some of the pains and joys of CRMs. But today we're going to focus on the pains, as we've got such great experts with us that will help us to kind of uncover some of these pains and see whether we can turn them around. So we thought we'll have this sort of 15 minutes. It's a bit of a warm up, trying to get you into that mood of really kind of brainstorming issues. And we thought we'd have the first part, we'll put you into small groups, just for you to kind of introduce yourselves and to really talk about what are some of the challenges that you're facing in accessing and using data within CRMs. It's something that I worked with quite a lot with the organizations at Legal Education Foundation, that one of the challenges was getting data out of CRM systems, but you'll have other challenges, and we're keen to kind of share that and think about how we can best kind of work through and support that in future sessions. So my colleague Kate is going to put you into breakout rooms shortly. And yes, that will be the sort of the key question to kind of talk about within your breakout rooms, and then we'll bring you back into this main session where we can just feedback. And if you're a little bit shy, you can just kind of put your thoughts in the chat, or you can just unmute yourselves and sort of speak directly, and then we'll move on to the main session. Okay.
Thanks, Tracy. Yes, I've groups of 3. We might have more people joining, so do welcome them if somebody suddenly gets joined to your group, and I'll spot as well in case anybody's, just to check nobody's left on their own. So 7 minutes to chat in your group of 3 about your challenges, and then a 30-second countdown. We'll come back into the main group. So I'll open those rooms now.
Time. And so I hope you found that useful in terms of speaking with peers, perhaps sharing some of the pains of CRMs and also the joys. It would be really great if some of you could just kind of write down in the chat some of the issues and challenges that you have been faced with. That would help us to kind of think through other ways in which we can kind of best support you, and also where it's possible. I think Claire and Harrison have perhaps already picked up a number of these challenges already, but it's also good for them to hear again about some of the challenges that they're facing, and that they might sort of emphasize more or less of some of these points. So do feel free to just write down in the chat, or if you feel brave enough to unmute yourself and kind of share for a little while. We'll just have about sort of 5 minutes just to share, and then we're going to move on to the presentations.
I'm happy to start. So I work with organisations. I work for a company called Third Sector Design, and we implement CRM systems for charities. And one of the common issues that we come across is just that data is stored in lots of different places. So they might have MailChimp for sending out mailings. They might have a system for sort of people registering for events. And then they have various different spreadsheets across the organisation. So it's just having lots of data in different places.
Can see lots of head shaking when you see that, so that's a very popular challenge. Anyone else want to share, or just to write down in the chat, and then I'm happy to read out what's written in the chat. So we've got types of data and how to efficiently extract and analyze, for example, text box data, and how to efficiently analyze and compile this. We have lack of flexibility, as an analyst to be able to manipulate and analyze data, sometimes lack of sufficient connectors with finance systems and regular manual data reconciliation, so reconciling between two different systems, and also how organizations can sometimes operate in silos and how do you share that data around your organization. Challenges, they're all coming in now, so
Yeah.
At first I was like, I can't believe nobody has any challenges around CRM. So the challenges we talked about, the distance that can exist between the data team and the frontline teams delivering services and not understanding each other's work. That's a common one that I've also seen as well, and the reasons for collecting that data being essential.
And an interesting, slightly larger small charity problem where you have got teams and dedicated roles, which you think might be the panacea for for some of the smaller charities we work with, where people are kind of got multi hats and picking up a little bit of a data lead as well as doing other things.
We've got both facing the same challenge on how to make best use of the data gold mines we know we're sitting on, about our service users and turning that into great visualizations. And that's great because Claire's really going to be picking up on that in her session. Heard about how to train users to do the right thing, so reports and dashboards don't break, and changes in the organization structure, services, etc. means our CRM no longer fits our organization, and that's a big issue as well in terms of A, selecting the CRM in the first place, and then B, as you grow as an organization, what do you do with a CRM that might feel it no longer fits? Challenges, new CRM process. If new CRM process, knowing how to get data insights can be a learning curve. Communications with data requesters can be a challenge to understand their context, and of course explaining why you need data is something we spoke about. Not knowing where all the data sources are, each team having their own survey. So again, that's where we're coming up on some regular challenges here. Then there's some names about different types of CRM. And so someone's interested to hear about that. So looking to implement a fundraising CRM, Beacon, Donify, looking to use Power BI. So Harrison will be talking a little bit about the actual tech and the CRM and what some of the considerations you should be looking at. And that's something you should be searching for when choosing your CRM. I'm going to stop now, but what we'll do is we'll keep a copy of all these challenges and send that out to you with the write-up that we've got now. But to stay on track, I'm going to now pass on to Claire to begin the first part of her presentation. Then she'll be followed by Harrison, and then we just have that last breakout. If you're hopefully you'll still be around just to kind of excitedly chat about some of the findings and insights that you've learned today and how we can take that forward. So I'll pass on to Claire.
Can you see my screen, and does it say where are we going?
Yeah,
it does.
So I guess at high level, now we are like 45 minutes together with Harrison, and we have a bit of time to talk at you about things, and then a bit of time for questions and have a bit more of an interactive session so that you get what you want out of these 45 minutes. So the structure will be high level. I'll talk about like the end of the data journey and the top of the iceberg and the thing that is like the thing you can see. And then Harrison will talk about the big part below the iceberg, which is under the hood and less visible, but the kind of power engine that enables the data products, I suppose. And I think we are the right people to talk about this, because together we kind of have all of the expertise end to end to get from like, you know, the kind of CRM into your data insights. And personally, I've been working in data for the past 8 years, I think, mostly in mission-driven organizations. I spent a long time in the charity sector, in service delivery charities, in a foundation, and in an umbrella body. So I've seen like different angles of charities. And then I went on to being a data scientist and more of like a software engineer role. And now I'm a consultant. So I do essentially data science for charities, and that ranges from like helping people build their data strategy and being quite high level around like, how do you use data, into like very hands-on work around, okay, how do we build this ETL pipeline and this first version of a data insight dashboard. So with that experience and expertise, I've seen a lot of different charities and a lot of different challenges. So hopefully my aim today is to take you on, this is not working. Is this working? On a data adventure. It is working. And yes, this is Dora the Explorer, because I feel like data often sounds like it's like people taking themselves very seriously, throwing at you like a lot of technical jargon. And I just don't think it has to be like that. I think the idea of this workshop is try and be inspiring and give you a sense of like, what is a data journey? Where does it start? Where could it go? And see, hopefully by the end of this workshop, you have a better understanding of where you are, so that you can decide what's the next best step for you. And with Harrison's part, also where you are and what's the next best step to enable that. So I'm using a framework to talk about data analytics, which is like the 4 types of analytics. It is not my framework, but I think it's useful to get a sense of like, get everyone on the same page and have like a beginning, a middle, and an end of the journey. So the beginning of the journey should be, and if you're not doing that in a first step, probably you should be doing more of it, is the descriptive statistics. So descriptive statistics is literally a question that describe the lay of the land. Like, how many people did we work with last quarter? Or like, how much did this fundraising campaign cost and how much did we raise? So very like descriptive statistics. And I have a story about this, which is the story of a very successful bar chart. It was actually potentially, I think it was the most impactful bit of data analysis I've done my entire life. And it was just a bar chart, which we did off an Excel spreadsheet. So the complexity of the analysis doesn't have to be correlated to the impact of the analysis, right? Like you can have a very impactful, very simple bit of analysis as long as you're asking the right question. So the story is that I was working for a service delivery charity delivering services to homeless people. And when I joined, I was told, we have a big problem. It's people who are coming to our service every day, but they're kind of stuck. They're not really progressing anymore. They're just here because they want to hang out. And that wouldn't be a problem in itself, but we're resource constrained. So they're taking the spot of other people who might need our service more. And also there was this feeling that potentially these long-term people who had been every day in the service, like taking a bit of space, might create that cliquey atmosphere that would like crowd out newer members. So we decided to look at a chart which had 2 axes. Hopefully you can see both axes properly. So at the bottom of the chart was the number of sessions, and at the top of the chart, at the y-axis was the percentage of people who attended that session number. So if we look at actual data on the chart, we had like 100% of the people attended session number 0. So session number 0 was like literally you walk in through the door and you fill out the contact form. And then session number 1, 80% attended it. And then, you know, session number 2, there was a bit of dropout, it was maybe like 70%. But what was interesting in this is that the assumption around the organization had been that once you had filled out the first contact form, you at least attended 1 session. So like you do your onboarding at 2 p.m. and the next day you'd come for a session. And people never thought that there were 20%. So 1 in 5 people who came through the door actually never came back. And that was the really transformative stat, because people were hung up on the people they kept seeing every day because they were very visible, but they missed out on the 20% of people they never saw again. And it's really hard without the data to come up with these conclusions because you don't see these people. That's exactly the problem. So that led to a complete like change around how do we onboard people and how do we make sure that we book them in for the first session systematically. And the dropout between like first contact and first session dropped from 20% to like 10% in the year. So that was a really successful and very impactful bit of analysis done with Excel and a bar chart. Now, once you've done that descriptive stuff, maybe there is something you can do around diagnostic analysis. So diagnostic analysis is about understanding, why did this happen? So for example, you might look into like, how can we improve the adherence of a program by 10%? And for this, you need to understand what are the levers you can pull to improve your adherence or whatever it is that you're looking at, right? So for example, let's say you're a mental health service delivery charity looking at like mental health for young people aged 16 to 25. And you have like a nice dashboard with loads of statistics. And you know that in Center A, you have a better retention rate than in Center B. And you want to understand why. And you ask your analyst like to improve the dashboard, and they keep like adding more and more data to that one dashboard. And by the end of it, you have like, for each center, like the referral routes, the support needs of the people, the demographic breakdown, and that enables you to have an informed decision, an informed conversation. But it's really actually hard to see, like, for example, if Center A has a better retention rate, but let's say they have most of their clients or young people come from a referral routes, which normally has like slightly older children and with a slightly lower support need to start with, like, how do you quantify which one of these factors plays out more in the retention rate? Well, the answer is that a computer is much better at doing this kind of calculation than a human brain. And so in this particular example, you could say, okay, let's do a logistic regression, which is a model which looks at a probability. So what is the probability that someone is an early dropout of our program, considering all of the factors that describe them? So you'd throw all of your CRM data into that model, and that model would output something like this graph. And the way to read this graph, so this is not a webinar around like how to interpret regression results, but it's more to give you an idea of the kind of thing you can do and the kind of conclusions you can draw from your data. So this graph tells us, for example, that if you're aged below 18, you're more likely to drop out than people who are aged above 18. And that is everything else being equal. This tells you that your Center A, which has a better retention, is actually not significantly different to your Center B. And that is even after you've included the demographics of the people coming to the center and their support need and their gender and other visible characteristics. And if you go down, like you can see resource, so your referral source one, let's say you're working with schools and schools are referring people, you can see that school one has sends you people who tend to have a worse retention rate than the school B. So this matters because it helps really going one level deeper into your analysis. So you stop the conversation around, yeah, our center has a better retention rate, but we have more complex support cases, but we also have a bigger budget. Like you throw all of this into one model and the model tells you like, what is the relative importance of each factor? It's also really interesting because some of these factors you can influence and some you can't. So it helps you think about, okay, what is the actionable insight that we can get from this? One word of like caution about this is that I'm currently talking about it like this model is some sort of like crystal balls that tells you exactly like how things cause one another. And that's not true. It actually gives you an informed correlation. So for example, let's say like in this graph, we see that female have a lower dropout rate than male. It doesn't say that women, like the fact of being female causes a better retention rate. It just tells you that women are more likely to stick around for longer, but it doesn't really tell you like probably the fact of being female relates to invisible characteristics which you can't put in your model, which lead to a better retention rate. So I think it's just like a word of caution around these models are very clever. They do have limitations, but they do help have a much better informed decision or informed conversation around like, okay, what are the levers of action we can pull? So then once you know all of that and you've got all of the information to act, there is something you can do about optimizing. And that's where predictive statistics come into play. So it's like knowing what we know, what is going to happen in the future, or what is going to happen to this person, right? So there was an example. So this was actually a data dive we did with DataKind. So Christian Against Poverty is a debt advice service. And as such, they collect a lot of information at onboarding to help people through their debts. And they basically have like 3 routes that you can like be directed to. So when you come in, you give a lot of information about your income, your debt. It's quite a long, cumbersome process. And then based on all of this information, an expert reviews your case and tells you, okay, you can go down the insolvency route, or this is your payment schedule to pay your debts. The problem with that is that you can imagine that if you're someone who has a lot of debts, going through a cumbersome administrative process is actually really stressful. And so that was a bit of a barrier, even at the entrance of the service. So we looked into all of the data they collect and where people in the past were directed to try and classify based on someone's information where they're most likely to be directed and what is the least information we need to be able to say with a certain level of certainty the route that they're going to take, so that instead of asking 56 questions, we ask 3. And with just 3 questions, we know that with a 75% probability, this person will go down the insolvency route. And so then we can direct them straight away to this route. And then they do the more in-depth assessment with an expert. But that helps like optimizing that process and making the experience better for everyone involved, really. And then the last bit is prescriptive analytics. So it's like, how do we optimize our actions, knowing what we know about our environment? So that's typically like what if scenarios. So let's imagine a hypothetical food bank, which would have a lot of information about the donations coming in and the demand. And they already know, like, they've already done the descriptive stuff, the prescriptive stuff, like they already know how the system works, but they want to assess, for example, like if inflation goes up by 5%, what does this mean for the donations coming in and the demand on the food bank, and how to optimize their system so that they can predict, okay, inflation is predicted to go up. We need to put some more money into like marketing campaigns to generate more donations to meet the future demand we can expect. So I say hypothetical food bank because my experience of food banks is that they're not that digitally capable. Like they're not like Deliveroo type of mature, but you could imagine that they would have a use case where actually there is a use case for them to be super aware of like their supply and their demand, because they're like essentially a marketplace. But yeah, as I said, to start with, you can have a very impactful analysis, which isn't super sophisticated. So that's important to bear in mind. So what you need to go on your data adventure, I think the first thing, especially if you're at the early stage of the journey, is to have an actionable problem that is part of a strategy. So I've seen that Johnny is online, so hopefully I give a good reflection of the conversation we had earlier this week. But I was speaking to Johnny, who's the CEO of a homeless charity, and he was telling us about they use data on safeguarding incident to decide on training needs. And because there is an action attached to the data problem, then you have an incentive to collect the right data and to be clear about like why the analysis is being done, right? So I think the good thing, like the perfect problem is the one that has an action attached to it, and ideally a strategy attached to it. So not like just isolated question, but like a broader organizational plan. I think it's really important to get the people who are the front line, the people who are collecting the data, on board with your plan, because they are the key factor for the data quality. So you don't want them to have an incentive to bias the data. You don't want them to not collect the data. So you really need to give them a good sense of like why you're bothering them, asking them to fill out demographic information or whatever it is that you need for your analysis. Then you need to have some sort of ethics framework in place. So this can be super sophisticated and it's probably an entire workshop of its own. But even for a small piece of analysis, think about things like who is not represented in our data. Is there someone who loses out if we're very successful at what we do? Like, should we be doing what we're doing? So it doesn't need to be like a full-on ethics committee, but there are some resources online with just like ethics spreadsheet checklist where you can ask yourself like a few basic questions on like, is it right what I'm doing, or am I at risk of making the situation worse for someone? And then the last bit you need is obviously a good CRM based on the right principles, but that will be for Harrison to give you more details on. So that was probably too long, but do you have any questions? One tiny question, comment?
Maybe better to take questions at the end and rather than just press on with Harrison's one for the moment.
I've got a quick ask from you, Claire. You mentioned about some ethical frameworks, and maybe if there's one in particular in mind, you could drop a link in chat. That might be useful for.
Yeah, I will find something.
Or afterwards.
Great, if we could pass on to Harrison now.
Super. Okay, I will just get us sorted out into the right place. There's a couple of more folks joining the waiting room already. Okie doke. Super. As with Claire, do give me a shout in a moment when someone can see the screen coming up. Super. Someone give me a thumbs up if we can see this.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And can you hear me clearly? Great.
Yeah.
Smashing. Okay. I'm sure as Claire felt, I could talk for about a week on all of this. So this will also be very high level. Do think of some questions you might want to ask either in this forum or afterwards, and I'll do my best to answer them. So let me do a quick introduction for myself. I'm the technical director at Suru Partners, and we, like Claire, work with nonprofits, particularly around data, but also really on the technical side, so thinking about CRM systems, integrations of those systems with other things, and as well things like digital services, websites, apps, and how those things kind of come together to create the experiences for staff and stakeholders, beneficiaries, partners, all the kind of people that are involved in the nonprofit space. How do those systems come together to work really nicely so that the technology is serving your mission, not you spending your time babysitting the technology? That's kind of our raison d'etre. So I'm going to try and pick up a little bit about some of the tips, some of the kind of ways to think about what can the software do for you? How do we think about the right type of software for you? And a lot of what I'm going to say is not just, you know, here are the 2, 3, 4 things that you should have, or go and buy this piece of software, because actually it's very context dependent. A lot of what we talk about will be really some principles about how you can think about this, and I'm happy afterwards in the Q&A or in a follow-up to get into kind of context specific things. But I think the overarching theme for what we're going to look at in this second half of the webinar will be really understanding what you actually need. And I think there's a reason we started with what Claire's talked about, because actually if we see a lot of organizations starting from the technology and kind of working backwards to what they're actually trying to get out of it. And normally that's the wrong way around to do things. If you don't have a really clear idea of what are the questions you want to answer, what are either the descriptions or utilization of that data, what kind of things you're trying to do, the technology can end up getting very complicated and very difficult to understand. And normally that's because people don't have a clear idea of what they're trying to achieve. So in large part, as Claire said, we work underneath the surface of the iceberg, and you've got to know what the outcome's trying to look like. So if you take one thing away from this is it. Technology should be led by your use cases, not the other way around. We quite often hear people starting on their journey with data saying something like, we need a data visualization tool, and that's not really good enough. We need to work better for that. So we're going to have a think about how we go about this with clients we're working with, and this is kind of the framework we think about when we're looking at analyzing, you know, what do we need, what tools do we need, how are we going to integrate our systems where we capture that data, those gold mines as we talked about them, and those systems might be CRM systems, they might be spreadsheets, they might be event platforms, anything you can think of. How do we think about doing this? So there's a few sort of blocks to this that we try and think about, and what I'm going to try and do is give you a bit of a framework and some tips and principles to help you think clearly about how to analyze what kind of tech you need. So just working through this, source systems, obviously you capture data somewhere, and those source systems, like I say, sometimes they're as sophisticated as, you know, a Salesforce CRM and unsophisticated as Excel spreadsheets on someone's computer. And I think a lot of the time it's worth doing a kind of audit to understand what data do we have, what source systems have we got, and thinking through mapping those all the way through to those use cases. So things we think about is, are you getting data directly into a CRM system or some other system, or is it really spread about? And we also want to think about the schema of that, because the type and the shape of your data dictates to some degree what systems are available to you. So we've got to understand what shape our data is in as well. So you'll hear me talk about schema some of today, and that's kind of what I mean. We'll see a quick example of how you might do some schema transformation in this process. Then you've got to think about integrations, how you're actually going to get data from wherever it's captured into something that you can activate. So how do we go from, for example, a form on your website through to some of the charts and visualizations that Claire's just showed us? How do we piece these things together? How do the systems talk to each other? Then we think about getting away from the source systems and actually into the analysis tools. You know, what tools are we going to use? And again, the overriding theme that I'll talk about here is to pick the right tools for the kind of level that you're working at, not trying to shoot for the moon and pick the most complicated, expensive platform you can imagine just to get some of your analysis done. It's about picking the right thing for the right use case, and we'll talk about how to think about that. And then at the very, very far end, these use cases. And this is where we start. And actually, I think we see a lot of people starting at the wrong place. So tip number one really is you want to start on the right-hand side of this. So the data flows normally kind of left to right in this framework, but we design from right to left. So we'll start at the end and work our way back. And I think this is one of the biggest mistakes we see organizations facing when they're trying to do a data project. Quite often, the people who have instigated some work around data have the level of understanding, and they're working at the level that Claire's just taken us through. They're thinking about those, but very quickly it can lose that. And sometimes we see projects being handed off to an IT team or someone who doesn't really have that, and they start looking for different heuristics, like you know, what systems are other people using? What ones look like they're, you know, strong players in the market and things like that. And the actual use cases you have often get lost along the way. So when we kind of start a data technology project, we're thinking from the use case forward. And I would actually go as far as saying, unless you know what you're trying to do with it, unless you have any idea, probably best not to start, because there's a lot of waste. And of course, in nonprofits, we are stewarding resources a lot of the time. There might be grants that we've been given, donations we've raised, so we don't want to waste money on tools that we don't need. So that's my big tip. It sounds really kind of straightforward and really stupid to some degree, but we see a lot of waste in the market. So getting into some practicalities, I want to do a quick bit of jargon busting, because we see a lot of people starting from kind of looking at the analysis tools, looking at the data tools, and they tend to get lost in a sea of acronyms and jargon, and they don't really know what they're looking at. So we'll do a quick run through of some of the terminology you might see that can help you understand what are some of the things that people are selling. What are they actually doing? What are the terminology you need to understand to help you think through what tools, what systems, what processes will allow you to achieve what Claire's talking about. So I'm not going to read off all these slides because they'll be gone round, but just to pick out some: business intelligence, BI, you'll hear me use that acronym quite a bit. It really is a very broad term, just it means visualizing data. Obviously, it comes from the commercial world, but you can think of it as anything to do with charts or graphs, or ways to put those things together. Normally, a BI platform will be mostly the kind of traditional charts and graphs. Actually, Claire showed you a much more interesting bit of diagnostic analysis, which might be a bit more tricky to get on some of the kind of out-of-the-box BI platforms, and you might be better off with something like Excel for a lot of organizations. But a BI platform tends to be something that you can pump data into, give you charts and dashboards and those kind of things. AI, I feel obliged to mention it, given everything in the news these days, but we're going to skip straight past it because it is mostly meaningless. I have a bit of an internal rule with my consultants that if we see AI on a marketing page, we mostly put that thing in the bin because a lot of the time it doesn't mean anything and it's a kind of marketing term. So I wouldn't worry too much about artificial intelligence. If Claire comes to you and talks to you about machine learning models, okay, they might know what they're talking about, but AI is slapped on everything, so I wouldn't give it too much weight. Equally, big data, that was kind of the previous, a few years back, everyone was talking about big data. What it actually means is data that's too large for traditional tools, and the vast majority of us in this Zoom call will not be dealing with big data. So I think, again, that's one you can mostly skip over and not worry too much about. Now, structured and unstructured data, these are quite important things to think through. Structured data is the sort of thing you'd imagine living in a spreadsheet. So if you can put columns on a spreadsheet and have data in rows, that's probably structured data. And I mention this because a lot of data platforms will also talk about things like data lakes, which we're going to talk about in a moment, and they'll talk about unstructured data. And I think, again, my word of warning here is that for a lot of organizations, they don't actually have any unstructured data that's of any value. Unstructured data often refers to things like I've put here, tweets or call recordings or images or handwritten notes or, streams of data from some manufacturing warehouse. And a lot of us aren't dealing with that type of data. So again, that's probably something you can mostly ignore, or at least something you need to be quite sure that you need before you start looking at expensive systems that can handle that, because those are often in the large enterprise space. So getting into some more practical things, ETL, Claire mentioned ETL. ETL stands for extract, transform, load, and this is not really a technology, it's just a description of a process that lots of data work and data systems have to think about. So it's where you extract data out of source systems, potentially transform it. So we're talking about a schema there. So that might be removing data for maybe GDPR purposes, aggregating data, putting things together, or changing the schema of that data, and then load, where you store a copy of that data or you load it into something else. ETL traditionally is where we're thinking about having quite a predefined list, and this is where most people should start. So we'll talk through what an ETL pipeline could look like, because an ETL pipeline is just the tech that allows you to do that ETL process, to extract data out of one thing, potentially transform it and load it into another thing, potentially getting it from the source systems into something that can achieve some of the analysis that Claire talked about. So diagrammatically, you might have something like this. This is something I nicked off the internet, but you can see multiple source systems on the left going through a transformation step into a data warehouse and into some kind of analytics tool. Okay, so this is a very high level idea of what an ETL pipeline could look like. Now, I just want to mention the T briefly. Extracting is kind of simple and loading is quite simple, but transformation, there's lots and lots of things you can do here. And again, a lot of what I'm saying here is a word of caution to avoid over-serving what your organization needs. When you look at the market for data platforms, data tools, a lot of the time you'll see them talking about aggregating millions of rows together and working on large data sets and doing really jazzy things. And a lot of people don't need that. But what we find in our consulting work is often people over-focus on that kind of exciting, kind of sexy tech stuff, but they really invest in thinking about what is the schema of my data, what is the source data that I've got, and what do I actually want to do with it? How do I need to think about transforming that data into something that's useful? Okay. So whenever you're looking at data, we often advise actually to spend quite a bit of time thinking about how you might need to move your data around. So if you've ever done a VLOOKUP in Excel, or if you've ever merged two columns together in Excel, you're doing some kind of transformation. And we'll talk in a moment about how we make a data transformation pipeline, something that's a bit more automated so you can try and get those insights more easily with less work. But transformation will be a step. Claire actually shared this example with me, which I've put on here because she didn't talk about it, but I really liked it, where there was an example of a charity that had multiple funders they had to report to, and they were ending up capturing the data at source in the way they needed to report on, because they didn't think too carefully about transformation. So instead of thinking, well, funder A and funder B, they have different ways they want to report on the age of some of our beneficiaries, they could have just captured the date of birth and transformed that. So that's kind of the simplest example of what you might do with transformation. But again, I mention it because lots of organizations, they don't think about this sort of stuff very much, and that can get them into situations where the technology is actually more complex than it needs to be. So a bit of upfront thought, a bit of planning can help you. Last couple of bits of jargon. A data warehouse, I mentioned that earlier. Data warehouse really is just a database, and there's nothing particularly magic about term, but you'll hear it talked about a lot. So this is often where we get data from multiple sources through an ETL pipeline, and we store it in a data warehouse. That might be a copy of your source data, or it might be a sort of transformed version of that data, maybe with multiple data sources merged together. But it's really about kind of co-locating your data so that you can centralize it and do something with it. It tends to be good for structured data. And it's a really old term. It's not magic, as I say. It's really just getting data into something. Now, these days, people talk about data lakes and ELT and exciting things. And again, my word of caution here, a lot of folks don't need a data lake, and that can drive you towards technology is far too expensive. Most people don't need a data lake. Data lakes are often about storing raw, unstructured data. And there's even a really exciting term that started being used in the last few years called a data lake house, where they kind of merged all this stuff together and called it a warehouse and a data lake combined. Now that again is for much larger organizations where you've got so much data that you need to kind of chuck it into a big lake, have a layer on top there, and when you sort of have some kind of governance around it with different teams having permissions, maybe ways of organizing vast amounts of data. So those are some of the terminology you might come up against, and it's worth being aware of what they are and recognizing which ones for different sizes of organizations, because I know we have people here who are, 1, 2, 3 person teams right up to, 100, 200 person organizations. You need often different tools, different types of strategies. So a bit of jargon busting out of the way. What might some of these approaches look like? And this is going to be a very quick whistle-stop tour through these things. Step one, and I mention this because often people think that they need it to be more complicated than it needs to be, but actually a lot of CRM systems and a lot of other tools will have pretty good reporting built in already. I've seen from the chat a few people using Salesforce, and Salesforce's example screenshots they put on the website are mostly examples of very bad reporting, very bad dashboards that are far too busy and they don't really give you any insight, but actually the tools are pretty good. So if you don't need to pull data out of your source system, like your CRM, then our general advice is not to. It's much better to try and use the tools you have. Sometimes we even advise people actually get their data into their CRM and use the built-in reporting tools in their CRM rather than have something like Power BI sitting over a data warehouse. So sometimes it might even be better to just use your CRM because it's such a central system anyway. Sometimes that's the right place to try and pull a few other bits and pieces. And when we're doing CRM projects, we often end up actually doing a lot of work to help people bring their spreadsheet into a CRM or into a platform, in large part so that they can do their jobs more efficiently, but also because it brings everything together. It can give some of that insight that we're looking for by bringing some of those business processes onto a CRM. That can sometimes be a more effective, simpler way. It's a bit more upfront work, but it can end up with a simpler architecture rather than having loads and loads of tools kind of fighting against how your teams are working. I know a couple of people in the chat mentioned this idea that they've got gold mines of data scattered everywhere, and actually you'll struggle normally to do good data analysis and getting that insight until you've done the hard work of bringing some of those things together. So a CRM could be a great place to do that. The T of ETL still applies. You're not extracting it or loading that data anywhere, but the T, look for things like formula fields or roll-up fields or bucketing, some of those kind of things that you can do within a CRM system. Still be thinking about your transformation, but don't disparage the idea of using your CRM system as one of your reporting tools. Now, if you do need to get stuff out of a CRM or other source materials, then obviously you can do an ETL pipeline where it's all manual. So we've got lots of clients that are having great success just manually pulling data out of CRM every month and putting it into something like Power BI. Now, my tip here is you want to make this repeatable, okay? This process can allow your organization to have access to some of the more interesting, powerful tools, particularly if you've got quite a simple CRM or simple source, or even if you've got stuff in spreadsheets. It can give you some of the benefits of a central reporting or visualization tool. My big tip here, though, is to make it repeatable. So this screenshot you're seeing is an example from Beacon CRM. This is from a project we were working on right now as we speak, so it's very, very recent. And this is where we're doing our kind of transformation within the CRM system so that what it exports can easily go into Power BI and be kind of ready. So we've done a bit of translation, we've chosen what columns we want to export. So that is a way of making it operationalized, where the process isn't relying on some poor intern or database manager having to remember, oh, I need to delete this column, rename this one, merge these together. If you can do that at source, it makes the whole thing a lot easier. So this is still really building up a data pipeline and making it a bit more automated, even though there's manual work. That sort of work is much more valuable than going and buying some fancy tool. So architecturally, that looks like this. It's even at this level, it's useful to think about kind of what does your pipeline look like, and we can build on this in a moment as we go through. So if you're starting from here, a good extraction process is that schema is defined in the source system. You can do some of that mapping, do some of that selection criteria, and there's some kind of automation around this, some kind of operational process that makes it easy for your organization to have access to that data. When we see people doing this badly, it's that they're exporting, they're doing lots of manual manipulation, and that's not really scalable. So you can still do a good kind of data pipeline, even if it's quite manual, if you take some of those tips on board. This is another example from a separate donation system for a client where we're working on getting multiple systems. And again, you can see here we're doing some remapping of their data. We're doing some selection of their columns. This makes that export a lot easier, and nonprofits, there's a lot of turnover of staff as well. So this makes it easy for the next person coming along to still run some of those key processes. Okay, layering up the complexity then. Some systems have an out-of-the-box integration with something like Power BI or Zoho or Tableau or some of the BI tools that you might see. And my tip, if you're going to do this, if you're going to connect a CRM directly to something, and they'll all advertise those integrations, my big tip here is number one, if you are selecting a CRM, this might be something you want to consider in your selection criteria. We're not talking about selections for CRMs today, but it's something we work on. But that might be worth considering. It's also worth testing these and making sure that before you sign a contract with a vendor, do some hands-on testing and make sure it actually works. But going back to what we've talked about earlier around kind of designing your data, making sure your CRM is capturing things properly, if you've got rubbish source data, an integration isn't going to magically fix that. And it's also not going to magically give you the questions you want to answer or the insight that you need. So you've got to get the stuff Claire was talking about figured out, and it's worth thinking through how you're using your CRM. Only then is it worth thinking about doing the next level up with the tech. So architecturally, this is what that might look like. You might have a separate analytics tool, whether it's Power BI or Zoho or Tableau or whatever, connected directly to your CRM. I think one of the breakout room I was in, we were talking about moving from step one, step two, moving from Salesforce doing the reports to having something else on top of it that gives you a bit more flexibility and power. Okay. Next step up then might be to actually start having an ETL pipeline. And again, you can do this these days with very, very straightforward systems. We've done a number of ETL pipelines that take data from a source material into a lightweight data store like a Google Sheet or some CSV files on a SharePoint drive or something like that. And the job here really is about finding those integrations that work, picking tools that can integrate from source to destination. So I mentioned this simply because historically there's been a bit of a gap between manual work, just doing things by hand, and really big enterprise platforms. There was a big missing middle, and people either were paying for stuff that was far more service than they need, or having to sit with manuals. There's a lot of tools here, and maybe in the chat afterwards I can fill people in with some examples of that. But just to give you an example, this is something we were doing recently with someone who has Shopify data, and they wanted to pull that out into a BI platform. So this kind of thing is perfectly valid. Again, it's most important to think through how this works. And actually, you'll notice this one has a manual upload step at the end. So they didn't need a data warehouse. What they needed was some time to think about what data do we want, what data do we need to report on, what questions are we answering, and something that's vaguely operationalized. So having a good manual process is better than having a bad automated process. So for this example, that works well. Now, if we do want to get into kind of proper data warehousing, fully automated and more control, you can kind of pull, as I said, different sources into a central repository. So that's what a data warehouse is. You can buy data warehouse tools. Azure Synapse Analytics, for example, is one of the more expensive ones. Or you can just shove it into a database, and any developer should be able to help you get a database. So it doesn't need to be kind of complicated or expensive to do data warehousing. Really, it's about moving that data into a central tool that a BI tool can then connect to. And a lot of the BI tools on the market now will be able to connect to a lot of data stores. So you can choose basically whichever one is cheapest or easiest for you to work with. That gives you the flexibility of the BI platform. So this is a data transformation pipeline that we've worked on for a Beacon customer recently, where Beacon is their CRM. They wanted to use Tableau for live dashboards that their execs and team leads can see. So a simple pipeline to pull data out of their API running on their cloud platform was what we went with there. So architecturally, this is this. As I mentioned, we haven't got a data warehouse product yet. We haven't had to pay for that kind of expensive thing, but we can still do a good ETL platform. You can get a data warehouse for £5 a month if you want, and that's a lot cheaper than some of the big name platforms. Of course, as I say, this gives you the option if you are going to go here and you want to get multiple sources, a data warehouse is a good choice there. Again, keep it simple, make sure you know what data you're getting. And as Claire alluded to, make sure that the teams that own this source data know what's going on. They know how they can use it in whatever solution you come up with. And we'll talk about those kind of tips for adoption in a moment as we come into close. And then the last one I mention is, some people really do need a full integrated data warehousing and analytics platform. So something like Azure Synapse is an example of that. They tend to be really expensive, and if you take one thing away from this section, it's don't jump straight to that just because when you do a Google search for data warehousing or business intelligence, those are the things that come up. You don't have to buy them just because you need to do the things they talk about. There's lots of other options, and a lot of my job is spent explaining to heads of IT that they don't need to go and buy the expensive thing from Microsoft to achieve what they want. What they should do is have simpler tools and spend more of their time and energy working on the stuff that Claire's talked about, figuring out those questions, figuring out the insight, making sure it's valuable. Don't waste money on technology just because someone in a big company said that that's what they do. Okay, so really, those first couple of examples I looked at, the tech was barely there. They're pretty easy, they're plug and play, you don't need lots of technical skill. Yes, some of the latter options will need a bit more technology and a bit more skill. You might even need to engage external expertise like us to do that. But the big takeaway is that picking the technology is not the hard part. That is something that an outside expertise can easily give you some answers to. The hard part is figuring out what you need. So actually a nudge in the right direction gets you there. Just to mention though, if you do need to do some of that ETL work, there's tons and tons of options. You don't need to hire a developer to build it for you necessarily, or have someone on staff. There's loads, a whole ecosystem of tools to get data out of one thing and put it into another. So a lot of that job really is kind of testing. So we often help nonprofits do that kind of market selection testing, because the analysis of all these things and their pricing can be a bit tricky. But just to give you an example of a really, really simple platform, here's a use case where we're pulling data from a Beacon CRM into Power BI, and this whole thing costs £10 a month to run, and it's bringing in hundreds of thousands of rows, and it's being really, really powerful. But just to kind of drive home the point, it doesn't have to be expensive, and it doesn't have to be complicated. This is loading data out on the left, doing a light bit of transformation in the middle, and just shoving it into a very simple, cheap database at the end that Power BI connects to. So this is just a couple of pounds a month. So I want to close off, because I know I'm running out of time rapidly. TechSoup folks do shout at me if I'm getting really, really short on time. A couple of quick principles, and some of that jargon, that tech, like I say, it's easy to overbuy. There's some principles that I think is worth highlighting, because consultants and vendors all tell you need some of these proper systems, and actually you need the thing that's right for you. So I've mentioned making it repeatable, making it operationalized. A lot of department heads that we work with, the most exciting thing for them is that they don't have to do the manual work, or no one in the team has to do the manual work. They can just tell someone, this will arrive in your inbox every week, or just log into the CRM and go and look at the dashboard we've made. That's more valuable than buying really expensive stuff, buying really fancy ideas. So a lot of what we advise is to make sure that whatever tech you do choose, make sure it's happening in the same way every time. So if you're moving data from point A to point B, or building a report, a lot of the time it's worth trying to find ways to make that repeatable and making it self-serve. So we don't want to have all that overhead of working with different people and having only one person, one database manager who knows how to do anything.
Harrison, just a 2-minute warning.
Thank you so much. Similarly, data preparation could be one of the worst cases for something not being repeatable. So if you possibly can, if you need to redact data or merge things or remove old data, you can do that at source, fantastic. But if you can't, make sure you've got tools that help you do that. and not rely on a human to do it. I talked about this. Every component could be simple or complex. So it's better to think through that pipeline carefully and understand what component or what person is playing each role than to try and buy some technology that you hope will be magic. So don't worry if what you need is quite straightforward. And we're not talking about CRMs today, but I do think it's worth highlighting, if your CRM or whatever source system makes it hard to get data into, you're never going to get the insight that you want. So it's worth spending time to design your CRM such that people want to use it and it helps their job. That will mean you have that data accessible. So we need champions, we need good design for our source systems, and you can ask me about maybe principles for doing that after the webinar. We talked about the use case, that's really important, and I'll let you read through these when we send these slides around. But I also want to highlight that operational reporting and data analysis often aren't the same thing. We sometimes see people talking about reporting when what they actually mean is like a dashboard of tasks. So these kinds of interfaces, on the left, we've built this for a volunteer mobilization platform that we've made bespoke. On the right is some Salesforce reports, but really those are dashboards to help people do their job. They're kind of task oriented. Don't use the wrong tool for the wrong job. People shouldn't have to go to Power BI to see what tasks they should function. That should be embedded in the system where they're doing their job. So don't confuse the two. You need different tools for different things. And then the final couple of points. Don't forget the people. The tech isn't magic. And if people don't adopt your source systems and they don't adopt the platforms, there's going to be no value. So we want to break that divide down, as Claire said, between the data people. So if you've got a gatekeeper, that's normally a sign that something's gone wrong. So we want to make sure we bring people along for the ride, get them incentivized, get them involved. So that might mean this job is more about training and championing than it is about the technology. And the final thing is that we talked about those source systems, those CRM systems as an example. If they make it hard to do that job, you're never going to get the right work out the other end. So this is a slide from another bit of training we do about choosing CRMs, and we sometimes push people a bit towards kind of away from things like Donify, which can be very rigid and very hard to get data out of, up towards things that are a bit more flexible, because they can then cover more of what the organization does. You might bring your grant making, your volunteer mobilization, and everything else as well into your fundraising system. Having it all in one place can make it easier to do some of this work. So here's the summary. Key points: make sure we talk about use cases. That's the more important thing than the tech. Make sure you start with a clear idea of what you need so that that guides the technology you need. Think about those data pipelines, but don't overserve them. Don't buy expensive tech that you don't need. Make sure you know what you're trying to do, and just think about making things a bit automated, a bit repeatable. That's normally a better bang for buck than going to the kind of top end. And make sure you understand the context of people that are going to use the data. It's all very well and good having a lovely, powerful machine learning platform, but if what you need is executives to load charts on their phone, you need to pick that and understand the use case. So make sure you start with the people, start with their context, and work backwards from there, rather than starting with the technology. If you do that, it makes the technology a lot simpler, a lot more easy to manage, and you kind of know when you're done. So we skipped over a whole bunch of detail there, of course, because this is only a short period. But if any of these things, so either designing and developing these pipelines, or integrating systems together, or even thinking about whether your source systems like your CRM are the right fit for you, I'm very happy to give some more kind of help and tips in the QA or afterwards. But that's it. That's what we wanted to say in this section about the kind of the doing side, the tech side, trying to support actually doing the analysis that Claire's talked about. Back over to you, TechSoup organisers.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much to the presenters, Claire and Harrison. That was really great, very clear, and so many tips and tricks around the decisions, around the processes. So I'm sure, and as you can see in the chat, people have really enjoyed the session. We do have time for a very, very quick Q&A, and there's already one question in the chat, so I'm just going to read it out. Could you, and I think this was during Harrison's bit, could you also address the self-service nature of some CRMs and how to control the flow of information and stopping citizen analysts from trying to create and duplicate reporting?
Duplicate reporting. I think there's two things I'd say on that. Number one is people often just kind of pick a CRM, they get into it, they dump all their data, they lift and shift all the rubbish data from their old place into the new, and it becomes a bit of a dumping ground. And they kind of think that the CRM will be magic, as I said. I think one symptom that that question is describing is a CRM that isn't really very well designed. So if I just jump back to this slide, sometimes if you have a CRM on the very kind of rigid side of things, it could be very difficult to design it in a way that makes it easy to use. I often say that you want to make the right thing the easy thing. So a well-designed CRM makes some of those people's jobs, you know, the thing that it makes easy to do is the right thing. And that could be about designing the interfaces in your CRM to encourage people to do the right thing. So that gets your source data sometimes better designed. Then the question of how do you stop people just making more and more reports? I think, again, that's really a people question, not a technology question. So what we do there is we make sure that someone is championing the capabilities of the CRM or the analysis platform, the BI platform, and they go around and talk to other people about it. So it's analogous to if you've paid for if you've paid for Zoom, for example, but everybody's just, someone's using Google Meet, someone's using this, that, and the other. That's not the fault of the people if they didn't know. That's the fault of whoever is trying to, you know, buy the right system internally and kind of talk about it. So that, I think, is about advertising to other stakeholders what they can do. So we like doing things like brown bag lunches or training sessions, kind of inviting people in to say, look, here are the capabilities we have developed as an organization for you, and being kind of humble about that, saying, do they help you do your job, or do you still feel the need for workaround? So step one, design the CRM in a way that makes it easy to get the data in the right way. And then step two, I think, is kind of advertise, champion for those capabilities, and don't just assume that if you've built it, people know what to do. That's, you've got to keep doing it. It's not, you don't do it once and then it's fine. You kind of have to keep talking about that on a regular basis.
Great, thank you so much. I don't think we have any other questions, so just wanted to encourage you to share some of your thoughts with us. One way to do it is using the Mentimeter that we just shared in the chat. And also we will put you for a very quick breakout rooms for the last 5 minutes, so that you can share and discuss with other participants what you just learned. We would like you to discuss 3 questions that I think Kate will post in a second in the chat. So what particularly interested you in the session? What will you try? So any takeaways going forward, and what support you'll require. That will also be very useful for us to understand what to prepare for our future sessions potentially. So that will be on the chat, and yeah, the breakout rooms should open soon, so we'll probably just do quick 5 minutes before bringing you back here to for sort of final wrap up.
Yeah, I've changed the timing to 5 minutes. People are dropping out, so just bear with me because I'm going to move the rooms around a little bit very quickly. Okay, I'm going to open the rooms now. So just 5 minutes to have a chat about your takeaways, and we'll monitor and maybe merge some of those rooms where people have left. Trace, it will be you and me because it won't have been automatically added. I've just got to move Sid because he's on his own now. This is a nightmare. I'm going to move Sid to room 8.
Yeah, otherwise.
Do you want to join? I can't join anyone because I've done the rooms. Which is the one? Richard's with Glenn.
Yeah. Oh, Richard's with Glenn. Harrison's in room 5. Sid's in room 8. Where's Ava? Room 2. Well, everybody's got somebody in there. Yeah. Suddenly everybody, I'd kind of done it in groups before, and I thought I'd made a little note. Tracy, room 6 ? But I don't think we need to. And I thought Alice. Oh, whoops! I'm still recording.